Hey everyone, welcome to the Backstage Classical Career Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Stroud, and I'm a classical violinist who started playing at the age of 3. I graduated from the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings at Mercer University with my bachelor's in violin performance, and I'm pursuing my master's in music at the University of Michigan. In this series, I invite esteemed classical musicians onto the show and interview them to tell their stories and give advice to share with others and preserve their legacies. Today, I'm joined by double bassist Jeff Turner, who was one of my orchestra directors at the McDuffie Center and taught me essential orchestral skills. Turner currently serves as professor of double bass at the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. He also holds the position of Distinguished Artist at the McDuffie Center for Strings at Mercer University. Turner was an adjunct professor at Duquesne University, where he served as director of orchestral activities, string department chair, and artistic director of the City Music Center's Young Bassist program. He also held the position of artist lecturer in double bass at Carnegie Mellon University. Turner has also served as resident artist for many annual educational festivals, including the Pacific Music Festival, the National Orchestral Institute, and the National Youth Orchestra. Turner served 31 years as principal bassist of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra and was the principal bassist of the New American Chamber Orchestra along with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. Turner appeared in a critically acclaimed recital at Carnegie Hall and has performed often as a soloist with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. Turner completed his bachelor's degree at the Eastman School of Music and completed his master's in conducting at Carnegie Mellon University. He has also been artistic director of the City Music Center Chamber Orchestra and music director of the Pittsburgh Live Chamber Orchestra. He served as artist lecturer in conducting and conducted opera productions at Carnegie Mellon University and has conducted his Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra colleagues in benefit concerts. Thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast.
It's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your musical background?
I grew up in South Carolina, and people will be maybe surprised to learn that many people that I grew up very close to are also very fine bass players. So, for instance, one of the teachers at Rice, Tim Pitts, and I grew up about 12 or 15 minutes apart. And many other very fine professionals come from that part of the country. So it was a surprisingly good, sophisticated musical education there. I had a good public school music program, and we had Brevard very nearby. Brevard was about 45 minutes away, maybe an hour away from where I grew up. So that was a good summer program for us. And then there were also good music schools in the area. I was really fortunate to have as my teacher in, junior high and high school, Pam Telejohn, who is one of the authors of the Essential Elements Method books. So she was really very good pedagogically, and that was a great influence on me. And I had a good bass teacher named Oliver Roosevelt who got me started, and I just wanted to give a shout out to both of them. My mom was a piano teacher and a church organist, so that also helped me a bit.
Yeah. And then can you tell us a little bit about your time at Eastman and how that affected your career?
Eastman was very good for me. I was a terrible bass student at Eastman. I was young, I was inexperienced, I didn't know much about anything, but I had a very good teacher, James Vandemark, who is an exceptional pedagogue. He basically showed me how to get around the instrument and was also very patient with me as he taught me a bit about music and other things about the music business. So I am, of course, very grateful to him. I have to say the best thing I got from Eastman was just a great, well-rounded musical education. We had good solfege classes. We had good harmony classes. It was just a good, well-rounded educational background. David Efron was the orchestra conductor, and he's a great orchestral trainer. So that was very good. And just the whole faculty was fantastic. So that was good. The other part of my Eastman experience that was really important to me was I went over to the University of Rochester and got an excellent liberal arts education over there, which is something not everybody in music schools gets a chance to do. So I was very happy about that.
Growing up, who were some of your musical role models and mentors? You mentioned a few, but
Right. So growing up, I got to see people who were soloists at the Brevard Music Center, as well as faculty people there, who really did help me a lot. I would guess that the first big professional influences on me would have been Misha Raklevsky, the music director at my first job, and then the principals of my two orchestras after that. Bob Gladstone was the principal of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and Sam Hollingsworth was principal in Pittsburgh before I became principal. And I did learn a tremendous amount from them. Of course, all the soloists that you play with every week have profound influences on all of us, as well as my other colleagues in the orchestra. And my three music directors in Pittsburgh had profound musical influences on me. They were about, I'd say roughly about 10 years each. The first was Lauren Mazel for 10 years, then Morris Janssens, and then Manfred Honeck. And of course, working for them week in and week out, they're going to have a profound influence on you. So I loved that. And then I should say there's one other person, Lawrence Hurst, who was the bass. He was a principal in Dallas before I knew him, but I knew him as the bass teacher at Michigan, at the University of Michigan. And I only knew him there for 1 year before he came to IU to be the bass professor. And starting soon there, I studied with him they weren't regular lessons, but I really learned a tremendous amount from him about auditioning and about the orchestral repertoire. And then I'd say, yeah, over the years, he may have had as much of an influence on me pedagogically in terms of bass as anyone. I took conducting classes and did conducting work. And as a matter of fact, I had applied to be in IU's conducting program after I graduated from Eastman, but instead I got a job.
I see.
So,
Okay.
so that conducting degree was delayed by almost 20 years, which happened much later in my career.
I see. Wow, amazing. So speaking of your career, can you give a little timeline of your career in terms of the orchestras you've been in and schools you've taught at and all that?
Yes, let's do the orchestra part first. And they're kind of there's the orchestra part, there's the conducting part, and there's the pedagogy part. So I'll try to separate this out. I auditioned for. I think it's changed names a couple of times, but it's the New American Chamber Orchestra, and it was run by Misha Raklevsky, who I believe, had worked for Spivakov when he was in Russia, but came to the States and started a chamber orchestra, and I auditioned for him. I think the day before I graduated from Eastman. I did not get to go to my graduation, but fortunately that did work out. And that summer I did go and work in Europe for a little bit, but then I got a call in October to go be their bass player. So I was the bass player there for 2 years, the only bass player. It was just a string orchestra, and there were some very fine Russian string players as well as some really wonderful young American players in that orchestra. And I have to say it was formative. One of the reasons it was formative is I was the only bass player, so I could tell just how bad I was. And then after that, I once again made an attempt to come to IU for a conducting degree. I had decided after 2 years of that it was we toured a lot, and let's just say the working conditions were rigorous. And so I was looking for that better job with a little more stable paycheck. And so I was planning to go back for a conducting degree, but instead got a job with the Detroit Symphony.
Okay.
And so I was there for 1 year, and that was a year when I really decided that I better get my act together as a bass player. I figured out that I could probably make a living doing it, and that's when I sought out Professor Lawrence Hurst at the University of Michigan. And by the end of that year, I had done pretty well at some auditions and got the job in Pittsburgh. So that was that was what led me to that orchestra, and I became principal of Pittsburgh 5 years later. I was there for a total of, I think, 31 or 32 years. And then there's another orchestra in there. As I was thinking about transitioning to teaching and away from the orchestra, I decided that it would still be really nice to still have some sort of playing work, regular playing work, and the Mostly Mozart Festival Orchestra. That's Lincoln Center's summer orchestra, which I now has a new name called the Festival Orchestra of Lincoln Center, but we still call it Mostly Mozart for the most part. And they had a principal opening, and I would have been well into my 50s at the time. And for any of you out there who think auditioning is hard when you're in your 20s or 30s, I advise you to give it a try when you're in your 50s. But fortunately, that ended up working out, and that to this day is my remaining principal playing job. So that's been a really wonderful playing career. As far as conducting, I had always done youth orchestras, coaching youth orchestras, giving a concert here or there, doing some district orchestras, that sort of thing. I had always worked at being a decent conductor, and I decided that I was going to finally go back and get that conducting degree. And as I did that, I did get a job for one of Pittsburgh's youth orchestras. It was very, very fine. As a matter of fact, a couple of the young students that I was conducting for that orchestra later became my colleagues in the Pittsburgh Symphony. So it was a very good group, and it was was the first time I really started thinking seriously about being more serious about my own conducting and getting better at that. So I went back and finished my degree, and shortly thereafter, I'd been guesting with some university orchestras, got offered the spot at Duquesne University to be their orchestra director. And I did that for several years, and I also kind of ramped up the all states and that, and then I actually eventually started conducting where you know me from, which is at the McDuffie Center. But I have to tell you that my motivation for it, sometimes people are confused or were confused. They thought I was trying to build a conducting career. And the truth is, I never really had an interest in that sort of thing. So much as my real love and goal was to help young people learn to play in orchestras well. So that has always been sort of the main motivation, and I'd say the other motivation is the musical growth that it brought me. I don't know quite how to say this, but the bass repertoire is limited. So I think that the other thing that really appealed to me was just the chance to grow artistically and musically. I love the orchestral repertoire, and always have, but it let me be deeper as a musician, and that was really the motivation behind doing the conducting. And then the teaching part, which has in a way always been my greatest love, began at Duquesne University almost as soon as I was in Pittsburgh, and I was very fortunate. There had been very fine teachers in Pittsburgh. I should bring up Tony Bianco, had been the principal years before I joined the orchestra. He was one of Toscanini's favorites, and as I understand it, Reiner had stolen him to come be principal in Pittsburgh. And he and others, Bob Leininger, and I think Sam Hollingsworth also did coachings. But there were some really fine teachers there, and some good music schools. And there was just and they were sort of winding down, and there was that perfect opportunity for me to begin teaching. And there were good public school music programs in the Pittsburgh area, so I could go out into the public schools, find good students, get them started. And I took that very seriously from the start and really enjoyed it. A few years later, I went to Carnegie Mellon University. There was, after I had taught at Carnegie Mellon for a bit, one of the deans called me in and said, "Jeff, you can't teach at both schools." And I felt a real loyalty to Duquesne because they had given me my start. And so I told them thank you, and I understood that I could only teach at one school. And I sent CMU my resignation letter that year. And the next year they hired me back and said, "Yes, you can teach too at both places." So that was nice. So for many years, I was able to have a sort of joint class where I would have roughly 8 students at Carnegie Mellon, roughly 8 students at Duquesne, and combine the big studio class together. People would travel to one or the other schools. They're very close together. So I kind of got to have a big class, even though there were only 2 small schools, which was good. I really did devote myself to that and loved it. When I got the orchestra director job at Duquesne, though, it was just such a big job that I needed to step away from bass teaching for a while. And I have to say, in some ways, that was a difficult time for me because while I was growing as a musician and a conductor and helping a lot of people in the biggest sense, I did miss that teaching very, very much. And I should tell you that the day I heard that the IU job was potentially open, I wasn't focused even on the money. I was willing to take a pay cut. I was just so excited to have the chance to work at a high level at one of the best bass programs. So that was it, and I've loved being at IU. I think right before I came to IU, I was already also working at McDuffie, but that's the McDuffie Center in Macon, Georgia, which is one of our nation's very finest music schools, and I loved working there as well. So that's that history.
Yeah, that's an amazing career. And I will say your goal towards conducting definitely resonated with me as, one of your orchestra students that you conducted. You really taught me a lot about how to be an orchestral musician.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you. That makes no one could give me a higher compliment. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's wonderful.
So, how has being a conductor affected the way you've played in orchestras?
Profoundly. It really helps to be able to step away from that singular role there and see the bigger picture all the time. I know that you can do that just as an orchestral musician, but I challenge anyone who thinks they really understand how an orchestra works and the repertoire deeply. I challenge them to conduct through the major repertoire with students, not with professionals who know what they're doing, but to pretty much conduct all the major repertoire with students in front of them and see if that doesn't profoundly change what's going on. I have had a few chances to be in front of some fine professional orchestras, and it is shocking how much you don't have to do. They're just they know what to do. And in a way, I think it challenged me more to be in front of young and inexperienced players and to have to be able to help as opposed to just stand up there and make fancy gestures with my baton. So yeah.
How have you developed your passion for teaching and your teaching methods?
The passion, I have no idea. It just comes naturally from the joy I get from being able to help people. To see a person who's struggling and to be able to help manage them, both in terms of how to get around that ridiculous thing called a double bass, and then to also then share with them the why part, not just the how to, but the musical part of that. I need almost no motivation for that just because it's so ingrained in me as a person. I would say that for teaching methods, I was profoundly influenced very early on. This would be at Brevard and then later at Eastman, and also with my colleagues going to master classes. I love to learn from all instrumentalists. And I honestly have learned just as much about the ergonomics of string playing from great violinists and great cellists and great violists as I have from my bass teachers. Starker was a profound influence on me. I got to see a lot of his classes over the years. I should mention that I guested at IU for months at a time sometime, and also did their summer festival programs. So I knew IU very well. So the teachers at IU had an outsized effect on me, as did all my teachers at Eastman. So I just say that I steal every day from the pedagogical methods of violinists and cellists and violists, just as much as I do from the bassists. The last thing I'll say about that is that there are so many wonderful methods if you learn how to use them. And that is unfortunately, that is handed down teacher to teacher. I think with YouTube, that is changing. But really, that is a person-to-person transfer that I'm hoping I can, in my last years here, I'm hoping I can make that a little more available because there's so much good pedagogical information and there are good pedagogical methods that we can use, and I hope to share that as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that's amazing for sure. And I've always been interested in kind of the legacy of pedagogy. I think that's
Right.
a really fascinating thing.
Yes. While the information we often try to convey, I don't think changes that radically. There are fashions in music as with everything else, but the way in which we teach has changed profoundly. Just in the past 100 years is astonishing how much changed. And there are things we have gained and things we have lost. And I would just say that I hope we don't go back to personality-based teaching, but instead these schools where everybody tries to play just like their teacher. I'm not a big fan of those. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So, as a teacher, how would you say you kind of cater your teaching methods to the different personalities of the students that you
That's a fantastic question. I totally tailor everything I do to each student. I don't give anyone the same syllabus. I don't give anyone the same exercises. I'm very individualistic in the way I treat each student. I once there was an interview with Timothy O'Leary, the LSD guy at he was at Harvard, I think, for a while, and there was a newscaster, maybe it was Diane Sawyer or maybe, but someone was interviewing him, and all she wanted to talk about was LSD. But he had been doing research since then, and he wanted to talk about the scientific research into the mind and how people learn and are, and he didn't want to talk at all about it. And finally he said, "Look, if you want to know what LSD is like, just imagine what it would be like to be another person. We're all that different." So, and it's true. People are just so different. They learn so differently that I do my very best to honor the person in front of me and not just some set of skills that I'm trying to transfer. Or another way to put that is, in some ways, I don't teach music. I teach people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that speaks a lot on your amazing teaching skills and the amazing pedagogue you are. You've collaborated with some really amazing musicians. Are there any in particular that stand out to you or stories you have to share?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I've been the luckiest person in the world in terms of the soloists and conductors I've gotten to work with. That is one of the things that I will say Pittsburgh gave me as a great gift was we saw first-rate conductors and first-rate soloists. I would say almost throughout my career. The big superstars, we saw them all, we toured with them all, so I could run down the list of famous people. But instead, I want to say that it is the orchestral professionals who really devote their lives to that craft that I have the highest respect for. Day in and day out, through vast amounts of repertoire, they have mastered skills, styles, national styles, period styles to such a degree and over such a broad swath of 1700 to today, and they're so professional and artistic. Those are the people that have impressed me and that I model myself after the very most. It's one thing to have 8, 12 concertos that you go around playing. That's great, and I love that. That's wonderful. And by the way, there are certainly soloists who know the whole repertoire. Our Professor Ennis it comes to mind. He knows the whole repertoire. There's a little rumor that goes around that when artistic administrators ask James' agent which concertos he's offering this year, the answer is all of them. Yeah, I know that's probably hyperbole, but that's very impressive. On the other hand, you do see conductors, star soloists, a lot of people basically do 12 pieces, 15 pieces, 20 pieces for their career. That is that not even close to a season's worth of material for an orchestral musician. And so the people who are doing that at the highest level, I want to say some names, but I'm afraid then I'll leave out somebody and not say any. So you know who you are out there.
So, who do you turn to for advice today?
My whole life, I have loved learning from old people. And that was so awesome, except now they're almost all dead because they were so much older than me. So I'm a little lost right now. I still do have a few mentors that I turn to. Larry Hurst as I'll go back to, is one of them. We still have dinner weekly, and which is just wonderful. And then I have learn from younger people as well now, and now that those younger people are older, they have some wisdom as well, and I'm very happy to get to learn from them. I do like every now and then asking, almost what you're doing right now, just having a little interview time with them. I often will disguise it as dinner, but but it's good to have that. So people that come to mind would be David Efron, who was my undergraduate by Eastman conductor, who then, of course, came to IU for many years successfully and is retired, but still lives here in Bloomington. So he's here as well. There are other people that I do like to ask pointed questions to sometimes, and I guess it would depend on the question who I would go to. I have this little poster up. I can't show it because there are names on there that might not want to be told about, but I think of it as my board of directors. So I have a pretty big list over there of names of people, and they a little bit fall into categories. People that I seek advice for, whether it's financial advisors or musical advisors or life advisors. I've found good ones over the years that have been very helpful to me. So finding good mentors and helpers. Find your board of directors. I would say to anyone, create your own board of directors. I'm sure for you, Mr. McDuffie might be one of those, or Ms. Moretti might be. Well, yeah, there's a great start. So I would recommend that highly.
Yes, I love that. That's an amazing idea. So I do want to ask you what you believe the role of classical music is in today's society and how music can bring people together during a time of tension.
Oh, it's a big question. I believe that music has the potential to do that, has to do some of that. There are things music can do, things music can't do, but I believe it can be a wonderful rallying point. I believe it is something that people from all walks of life and political persuasions can grow to love and can learn from and can take messages from. The messages are inherent in the music, but we do have to make that explicit, which means learning to not just do play and talks and sort of being able to, in a entertaining and fun way, explain what it is we're doing and what it is we're attempting to communicate. But it also means that I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think we are not playing music often today in a way that does appeal to people's to their experience. Let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. I can remember certain players who would play, and it would just grab me in terms of the vivid musical message that they were making. I see less and less in that, being very honest, and I wish I didn't have to say it. One of the things that, especially as a bassist, that is super evident to me, and especially in recital performances and in chamber music performances, but also in orchestras, this is happening as well. I hear, let's just say, solo Bach, and I can't tell. I know because I know these pieces. But if a person who didn't know them heard the playing, they would not be able to tell what meter the music was in. There's that basic sense of rhythmic conveyance that your average person, who may not be you can call it sophistication or education or anything like that. But if you go to hear someone play and you can't tell the meter, or the drummers would call it the feel, that's the word, that's probably the word we should use. So people don't get a feel. They don't get that sense of time and flow, and so they turn to pop music.
I see.
Pop music is giving them direct emotional experience, and we need to get back to giving them that direct emotional experience, and that involves rhythm to an extent that, unfortunately, solo recitals and some of the chamber music that I hear, even when it's at a very high level otherwise, it's missing something that would appeal to a general audience. And I do think the percentage of the adult population that listens to solo recitals and chamber music in my lifetime has declined from about 5% to about point something percent. We're headed the wrong direction with that, and we must find a way to at least get back into some part of of the population.
Yeah.
And for us to do what you're talking about, to reach out and affect, we're going to have to change the way we play and reach out and give people direct emotional experience. So, again, when you're a bass player trying to be that, especially in classical music, we're often the rhythm and the harmonic function, which is not so different as the function of an electric bass player or an amplified player in jazz. I have to tell you, among bass players, we often just shake our heads because we're kind of the only people on stage sometime who are really primarily thinking through the rhythmic flow of a piece and how that's going to be understood by a person who doesn't already know the piece. So sorry for my sermon, but there it is.
That's very true that we need to think about what it is that draws people to music. Thank you for sharing that. I like to close with this question. What advice do you want to give to aspiring professional musicians?
Okay. In my undergrad, my teacher realized, I think he became aware that I was doing pretty well over with some advanced classes over at the University of Rochester. He was like, "Look, Jeff, you see, you're smart enough. You could do something else, you know." And he said, "You should only do this if you have to." And I was a little shocked by it, honestly. It almost felt discouraging, but I knew he didn't mean that. And I thought about it for a while. I really did give it some deep thought, and I just have to. It's just I somehow was built to do it, and it has been a wonderful lifetime experience for me to get to do all of this. So that's my take on it. I also want to speak for every year for decades, with those few years as conductor sort of omitted, I've always had usually in the neighborhood of 16 to 20 students every year. And of course, we know the numbers. We know that even if all of my students got jobs, there simply aren't enough openings in any given year for bass players with jobs with healthcare, jobs with a pension or a retirement plan, that where you could live. There just aren't enough jobs. Even if only my students were doing them, there aren't enough jobs out there to sustain them. So I just want to. I think it is important as a counterbalance to that, to be sure they understand the realities of the music business as they are learning the music business. I think it's important not to hit them over the head with a frying pan of bad news at the very beginning of their studies, but I think it's important a piece at a time to explain how this fits into the structure of professional music making. And that's one of the things I love about the McDuffie Center is I think you guys are very well prepared for some of the realities of the music business. No school can prepare everyone for everything, but I do think there's a real focus on what it's going to take and what the options are. I live in bass world now, and of course, for us, the options are primarily orchestral and educational. Those are the two big places where. But for a violinist, of course, the options are bigger. Although with chamber music in decline, that's getting smaller. You have to really be able to do it yourself as a business person. So I think it's important that we not be discouraging in the way we tell people the realities of the business, but I think it is an important part of the training to be sure they understand those things. Is that making sense?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for so much for this interview. It's been amazing to hear about your incredible career and to hear your advice. So,
It, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you to Jeff Turner for a great episode discussing his incredible orchestral, conducting, and teaching careers. His passion for music and wisdom has affected so many around the country, and I'm grateful to have had the privilege to work with him. Thank you so much for joining me on Backstage Classical Career Conversations. I have exciting news that I just launched a new website for this podcast, and you can find it at backstageclassicalpodcast.com. This was made possible by the University of Michigan Excel Enterprise Fund. If you would like to support this podcast, please leave us a rating and review on the platform you're listening to this on. You can follow us on Instagram at Backstage Classical Podcast, and be sure to tell your friends and family to share these career stories from some of the top musicians in this country. I'm Katrina Stroud, and it was great to see you here. Until next time, stay inspired and listen to the stories of others.